Hello, and welcome to Piece of Pod Employment Law Conversations, your go-to guide for navigating all things employment law related in England. I'm Sarah Whitemore, and I'm an employment lawyer and senior partner in South Coast law firm Warner Goodman, and I've got over 30 years of legal experience. In this podcast, I'll be talking with law firm partners, business owners, entrepreneurs, and other people engaged in the world of work, and we'll be discussing all things related to employment law, how to manage people, and how to excel in today's modern dynamic workplace. So if that's of interest to you, grab yourself a drink, get yourself comfortable, and let's dive in. Today I'm joined by Cath Dixon, and she's an HR professional working at Warner Goodman. She works alongside our legal advisors to provide practical support for our Peace of Mind members and other business clients. So welcome, Cath. It's very nice to speak to you today and have you join the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So you and I have worked together for a long time, Cath. We started out, you were a client.
Yeah.
You then became an outsourced, self-employed HR consultant, and we referred our clients to you. And now we've got you in-house as our HR consultant, helping our clients. So for those who haven't met you before, those who are new on our audience, do you want to just describe your background a bit and how you came to Warner Goodman?
Yeah, so I was an internal HR manager initially at a housing association where I was for 10 years or so. And then after being made redundant there, I went to a care provider where I was another 10 years or so as an internal HR manager. So 20 odd years in and around housing and care, very similar sectors. I left my last employment. I'd got a bit burnt out, it's fair to say, that I was a bit broken and a bit tired, had a bit of time out, and then decided to go solo as a HR consultant. So started setting up my own business, focusing on the care sector, providing HR consultancy, doing discipline and grievances, training, that kind of thing for care sector clients, and that was at the beginning of 2019. So I'd only really sort of just got up and running when COVID hit and care homes shut down, and I lost a lot of clients overnight really, because the obviously care sector couldn't do anything other than focus on the pandemic. So I picked up a part-time maternity cover job just before COVID hit, which kept me going through that period, and that was when I sort of reformed the relationship. It'd always been there, but reformed that relationship with you guys and Tash, who was my predecessor, who started sending me some overflow to do as a freelance for you, and I liked it so much I joined the team.
And we're delighted that you did, not least of which because we get to have coffee and cake, which seems to be one of your favourite ways.
It is one of my favourite ways of communicating, absolutely.
So a lot of experience in the care sector, and what in particular makes the care sector open to having HR advice or needing to have HR advice?
So the care sector, you've got some fantastic people that work in the care sector. They work so hard for not an awful lot of money, but that can bring with it its own challenges in terms of some of the people that will join the care sector that perhaps aren't quite right for working in that sector. So we may have performance issues or some conduct issues around that they need to deal with. The other thing that happens often is care workers, because they're so dedicated, will work and work and work and work until they get burned out. So there's lots of sickness, mental health related issues around people in the care sector as well. Fantastic bunch of people, really dedicated bunch of people, and lots of training needs there as well, but and high turnover too. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine that obviously it's highly regulated. You've got the Care Quality Commission, and there's lots of documentaries and things about standards of care, and you've got families who are going through an emotional time, and they're very heightened about their awareness of careness, quite rightly so. And so there are things like whistleblowing that comes out, performance issues that come out, and those can be quite emotive topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that tends to happen in the care sector is because we've got nice people. You don't go into care if you don't genuinely care about people. And most care managers have come up through the ranks either through a registered nurse or senior carer role. So they are carers first. managers second. And so often when there are signs of poor performance or signs of minor misconduct, it can be easily dismissed or not dealt with because they're carers first and conflict doesn't come naturally. So you can kind of try and, I don't know, paper over it or dismiss it because, oh, they're a good carer, they're a nice person, and we don't deal with the smaller issues. But then all of a sudden you get a big issue, and we know that we can't ignore a big issue, and that's when, you get massive investigations, safeguarding concerns, that type of thing, where the pressure really is felt in terms of getting it right. Because of course you're not just talking about getting it right in an employment law context, but also about getting it right in terms of making sure that if that individual is someone that shouldn't be working in care, that we've got all of the evidence to be able to make a referral to the DBS service so that they don't work in care going forward. You've got that ongoing commitment to care in general and to vulnerable people to ensure that wrong-uns are not able to work in the sector again.
And you talked earlier about the sort of financial pressures of care, that the care packages that are provided by local authorities are not necessarily very financially lucrative. It's difficult to run a business on the sorts of money that they're paid to look after people because there's an awful lot of expenditure involved in care.
Absolutely.
The way that you work with clients, they have the ability to dip in and out of HR, so that sort of gives them an ability to manage their additional HR needs within a confined budget.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no commitment with me. If you need some extra hands-on or you need some hands-on support because you can't afford an internal HR manager, then you can just pick up the phone and I can do ad hoc piece of work for you, get that bit done, and then off you go again. Or we can have more regular contact and have, almost like the peace of mind arrangement, but doing it like an HR manager that pops in once a month for your regular HR catch-up. So there's different ways and models of having somebody, but not having that full-time HR manager salary to pay out for.
And that gives them the extra resource, as you say, without having a whole extra person on the payroll that they perhaps can't particularly
that
afford.
Flexibility, indeed.
Yeah. And if your specialism, or one of your specialisms, you're a qualified mediator.
Yes.
So do you find that mediation is something that is used in care sector or can help care sector businesses?
It can help everybody. There are very, very few situations that mediation can't help with. Not a lot of people think of it as a solution. We tend to get so embroiled in the conflict and so wound up with our own perspective on what the conflict is about that we're kind of reluctant to sit down and see somebody else's point of view. But that's the beauty of mediation, is that when you get two people seeing things from each other's perspective, they realise that, oh, that wasn't about me at all. It's not, you haven't done that to annoy me, you've done that because something that's going on in your world. And I didn't realise that, and now I feel better because you weren't targeting me. And getting two people together, getting them to listen and see things from the other's perspective is hugely beneficial in resolving those conflicts and just generating that understanding. And that works in any environment, care sector, public sector, private sector, anywhere. Talk it out, people.
And mediation can only work if both people want to be involved. So you have two people in dispute. If one of them is so involved and ingrained in their dispute, they're not prepared to go ahead, you can't.
No. Mediation won't work if one of the parties doesn't want to be involved in that mediation. But often that's more about the fear of getting to the joint meeting. So in terms of a process, as a mediator, I will meet with each individual first, on their own, in the first instance, before even beginning to try and bring them together into a joint meeting. And just having that part of the process, even if they never get as far as meeting together, just having that time with somebody who will actively listen without judgment can help the individual in conflict feel better about themselves, about the conflict, about everything. Even if we don't get them to the point of sitting down together, giving them the opportunity to talk to a mediator and clarify their thoughts and their feelings is beneficial.
And I guess that's also financially beneficial for the business because it avoids the need to go into a formal process, whether it be a grievance process or a disciplinary or a capability process. and the additional people involved in that and the additional time and expense is reduced.
Absolutely. I mean, at the very basic level, if you think I spend an hour talking to party 1, an hour talking to party 2, and maybe 1 or 2 hours speaking to each party together, that's 4 hours of time trying to resolve that dispute and usually walk away with a positive outcome. It takes way more than 4 hours to resolve a grievance, to do the investigations, to write the investigation report, to hold a hearing, to write the outcome letter, to write the notes up of all the meetings involved in that. And then you've still got a situation where, although maybe the grievance has been upheld or it's not been upheld, those two people still aren't working together. So you've spent all that time and that money to resolve the grievance, but it's not resolved the relationship. And mediation, for a third of the time, will resolve the relationship. It's a no-brainer.
And I guess a lot of HR managers are not qualified mediators. They'll understand mediation and how it works, and they'll understand the need for it within the business, but they don't necessarily have that particular qualification.
Yeah, absolutely. It was something that I came across relatively early in my career, I think, and it was something that I hadn't heard of at all at that point. And the more I heard about it, I was more like, this is brilliant. And of course, at that point, we were using external mediators. So it was something that when I left the housing association, it was something I knew I wanted to do. And so I did that in the gap between leaving my last employer and joining the next one, was doing the mediation training. But the benefit is that you've got me as a trained mediator. If you don't have one in-house that's trained, then you can hire me in.
Absolutely. And I suppose for our clients, they've got a regular face as well, haven't they? So they've got a mediator coming in who understands the business, because they may have done some other work with you in the past. You might have done a bit of training or gone through a procedure or whatever, as opposed to just a cold contact.
Yeah, hopefully I'm a trusted face, or I'm part of a trusted team. Even if they've not met me before, they know you, and so it's part of that. I'm part of that team that can help and support them, so it makes things feel a little comfier, a little easier.
Absolutely. So let's go back a little bit then to your time as an HR manager. I guess you were working in a team of 1 in those days, were you?
At one point, yes, I was a team of 1 HR professional dealing with 750 staff. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. It's not a healthy ratio.
And I guess it's quite isolated as well, because you've got the staff who are the staff and the senior leadership team, and then the HR sort of in between. And often there's uncertainty about what quite their role is within the business. But certainly they don't necessarily have someone to bounce ideas off or talk to. Did you find it isolating? Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you've got people around you. I think in HR you've always got people around you, you've got good colleagues, but being the HR manager, you never know when you might have to discipline somebody, or you might have to have that redundancy at risk conversation with somebody. So the work colleagues I have never been as close as maybe other colleagues in teams are, because there's just that different level of, I guess, trust and conflict of interest that comes into play when you're in HR. So that's one of the things that can feel a bit isolating sometimes. Also, when you're reporting to the chief exec, where do you go if the chief exec isn't listening? Where do you go? And that's where having a network of HR professionals around you is hugely beneficial. That's something that I really want to develop with our Peace of Mind members and the HR professionals in our geographical area, is to have a network of like-minded people that you can go, oh my God, you won't believe what's happened today, because it's that safe zone, that people that get it, that understand the pressures. And people like yourselves with the Peace of Mind service, to be able to phone you up and go, right, this is what I think I'm doing, this is what I think's happened, can I just tell you? And then you can say yes. And that was very often how our conversations went, wasn't it? That I'd phone you up and go, Sarah, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and you go, yeah, all right, Kath, off you go.
Yeah, absolutely fine. You know what you're doing, off you pop. I mean, I think that's one of the things we're working on together, isn't it? Building this community around us, so that we've got lawyers that give employment law advice. We've got HR consultants give HR advice. We've also got a community of HR members who and managers who can give each other advice on the practicalities of things. So we might talk about what the legal issues are around strike days, for example. We've had a lot of experience of that over the last 6 months or more. But our members can talk to one another about what they do in practical terms about changing people's shifts or giving extra overtime, or how they're actually managing their workforce through those times. And I guess that's, as an HR manager on your own, that's not necessarily something that you have access to easily.
Absolutely. Sometimes you'd be like, I know there is a simple solution to this problem, I just don't know what it is, or I haven't got the headspace to be able to think about it. And that's when your network comes in, to be able to go, has anyone had this before? Oh yeah, I've done that. I tried this, I tried that. Oh, have you heard of this person? They can come in and do that. That's their specialism. So yeah, having that network around you is hugely beneficial. And yeah, that's what I'm keen to develop and create around us.
And then we talked about, if the boss is the problem, but generally speaking, you do need to have a good relationship with the senior management team, senior leadership team. They're the ones who are going to buy in and implement whatever it is you're recommending.
So for one of the other things it's important to be as a standalone HR manager is courageous. You've got to have that courage and that integrity to be able to sit down in a meeting with your chief exec and go, I need to speak honestly for a minute. This is how I feel, or this is what I'm seeing, and I know you don't like this, or this isn't your perception, this isn't what you're seeing, but I really need you to hear that there is an alternative perception, or that I'm feeling this way as a result of what's happening here, or that I'm worried about how this might be perceived by our staff. And you have to have that courage to be able to sit down and say, I'm not sure this is the right thing for us to do. And that can feel very isolating in itself.
And do you find management are often resistant to the cost of HR? They can see the value of sales, they understand why they're spending money on marketing.
Yeah.
Do they understand why they need to invest in HR and in their people?
Yeah, HR is often seen as just an overhead, isn't it? That we have to have them to keep us out of court. But your HR managers provide so much more than just keeping you out of court. They are your people experts. They know your staff. They read your people. They understand motivation. They understand the different nuances of different people and how different people respond in different situations. And they advocate for your workforce. So listen to them. They know what's going on.
Yeah, and I guess at the moment, we've got some really difficult situations. We've got the cost of living crisis that still seems to be out there, issues around Ukraine, or now we've got the Israel-Palestine issue. A lot of people going through a lot of stressful things and a lot of anxiety out there. How are businesses adapting to that? How are they able to help their people through those sorts of crises?
Yeah, I think it's hard work at the moment, and it's hard work for a lot of people. And I think something I've noticed is that actually we're all still carrying around an awful lot of leftover stuff from COVID. I often talk about people's buckets. We all carry around a bucket, and our bucket is usually at least, a third full with stuff that came from our childhood experiences, stuff like that. We're almost never able to entirely empty our bucket, so we've got that in there. And then COVID came along and it filled it up almost to the brim, going through that whole lockdown experience and all the challenges and kids being off school and homeschooling. Oh my God, that gives me PTSD just thinking about it. But all of those things just went into our bucket. And we've still been carrying around a really full bucket, and it's hard to empty it. And so then you get this situation where you've perhaps got financial worries on top of that, or something goes on in your personal life and people are not coping. The resilience is not there because the bucket is full. And so the only way is to empty the bucket and to find activities that empty the bucket. So that is basically self-care. And so by promoting self-care, by promoting the needs of the individual in the workplace, that is the best and most supportive thing an employer could do. Look after your staff and they will look after everything else. But if their buckets are full, you need to help them empty it. So whether it's by having conversations that say, I know your bucket is full, or I can see your bucket is full, how are we going to empty that? Whether it's somebody needs to go for regular runs, whether they need to make sure they're eating properly, whether they need to sit down and do some craft activities, whether they just need to have a couple of weeks off and go on holiday. It's all about that, doing something for you that brings you joy. That's what empties your bucket, and we don't do enough of it. And so for employers to encourage people to do the things that look after themselves and not make things more difficult. You know, if you're planning a restructure or you're planning a change at work, talk to people about it, because all that stuff is anxiety inducing and they've already got full buckets, so they're not going to respond well to that conversation. Cut them some slack, give them some space to be able to process it, because process is harder when you've got a full bucket.
And we're filming this today on World Mental Health Day.
We are
I'm
indeed.
not quite sure when it's going to be broadcast, but it's World Mental Health Day as we're talking.
Yeah.
And I was looking at some stats this morning that have been published by the CIPD, and they said that over a third of employers have had people off work with mental health issues in the last year. 37% actually, so quite significantly over a third of employers.
Yeah.
So not looking after someone's bucket and making sure it doesn't overflow is going to have an impact financially for businesses, isn't it? Absolutely. In terms of absence, in terms of knock-on impact of the covering the work of that individual, in terms of morale. If I'm watching you get burnt out at work and my boss does nothing about it, then, and I'm already starting to feel a bit wobbly, then I know I'm not going to get looked after either. So looking after the individual shows the team that we look after everybody, and that will mean people are more open about their buckets being full. And then spending on things like encouraging craft activities or encouraging walking and eating healthily and all those sorts of things, that spend is a small proportion of the money that they'll be saving and not having people disappearing off with often long-term absences, because mental health impairments frequently you'll find that they're signed up for 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks becomes 4 weeks, and then 4 weeks becomes 3 months, and before you know it, they're on a long-term sickness program.
Yeah. So there are lovely little things that you can do in terms of, like you say, craft activity or free fruit or some yoga sessions or whatever, but just be mindful about a term that keeps being used now is well-being washing, where we say we do all these things, but actually our behaviours as a management, as a leadership team, are not healthy behaviours. So dressing somebody down in a meeting, expecting emails to be answered at all times of night and day, setting unrealistic deadlines, generally all that stuff that is bad behaviour, that is, if it's tolerated in the workplace, that's the thing that's going to damage your staff's mental health more than anything. So go back to what are the values of the organisation, what are the behaviours that we expect, how do we expect our managers to behave with each other, and role model that as a leadership team, and call out behaviours that are toxic in the workplace, because they will be filling up buckets no end.
And CIPD, in their own commentary on their report, was saying the key to all of this is your line managers and making sure that they are appropriately trained and that they are equipped to deal with these things. Because, you know, we talk a lot more about mental health in the workplace these days than we ever did when I started out 30 years ago. But people aren't necessarily trained to know how to respond or when to respond. The CIPD research showed that employers put more time and more money into training mental health first aiders than line managers, and the line managers really need to know, how do I conduct a return to work interview, what do I do if I can observe symptoms, if someone's emotionally struggling or physically struggling, what do I do, when do I comment on their symptoms, when do I just turn a blind eye, and that sort of thing. You do a lot of training, don't you? Absolutely.
I'd take it back a step even further. How do I talk to that individual and find out actually what's really going on for them? How do I understand them? How do I make sure I'm understood? Communication is one of the everything thrives on communication, and when we get it wrong, that's what causes problems. So just having those basic communication skills, we often don't train in it, understanding how each other are, how different people communicate. And that's one of the things I'm talking about in our next HR Hangout. We're talking about colourful communication, which is a basic profiling tool to allocate 4 different colours to different types of communication preference. Really easy tool, but it's one that I use so many times through talking to people in different scenarios. That person's a red, that person's a green, red and green are opposites, that's why they're going to be in conflict. So but doing having communication training through leadership development programs, looking at the importance of perception, individual perception, how conflict comes up, things like looking at the drama triangle, all those types of things are all things that I use in training sessions, in leadership development, in managing difficult conversations, different styles of leadership to help people feel more confident in how they communicate with their members of staff, because if we get that bit right, everything else falls behind.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to doing a bit of craft work with you. That sounds terrific. Meantime, life's a bit of a juggle, isn't it? You and I have both had to juggle our careers with bringing up children. Mine are a little bit older. I don't think they'd be happy to be described as children anymore. Young adults I've got now. But you've just gone into the secondary phase, haven't you? So
yes.
How have you managed to juggle that sort of working and bringing up children?
I don't know. It's been a blur. No, fortunately I've got supportive family around me. My husband works flexibly as well, so he put in a flexible working request when we first had our first child, so that he was able to do a bit of the pick up from nursery. So yeah, just juggling. I think that's what every working mum does, is you learn how to juggle. And I think for me, to begin with, it was really hard, and the step change for me was realising that the people that I thought had it together and were doing better than me were having the same struggles. So it was kind of about talking about it and going, do you know what, yeah, being a mum, being a wife, being a professional, they're all full-time jobs in themselves. And so no wonder you're finding it hard, because yeah, back in the olden days, being a mum and a housewife was a full-time job in itself, let alone trying to work on top of it. So cut yourself some slack. It's hard, but you get through it. I've got no better advice than that, I'm afraid. Just keep swimming.
I think it's that thing about being a swan, isn't it? You look like you're in control on the top of the water, but underneath your feet are paddling like crazy. So it's one of those things I think you just have to give the perception of being it. And maybe even just talking to your other working mums and saying, I'm doing this bit, how are you?
I think looking after each other is a big part of it. Having the other women's backs in terms of saying, I feel you.
Absolutely. Well, I feel you, Cath, for sure. Any final words of wisdom for our audience, or encouragement for our audience out there?
Final words of wisdom would just be, look after yourself. Put self-care first. If you don't look after yourself, who's going to look after everybody else? So, and that particularly goes out there to all the standalone HR managers out there. Put yourself first, and then you can look after everybody else. Self-care, do something that's just for you.
That sounds like a perfect suggestion. Meantime, do something just for me. We've got the audience-sourced question.
Ooh.
So, in these 4 envelopes, we've got a question. Which one would you like me to ask?
This one. Do I get to open it, or do you open it?
Feel free.
Okay. If you were given a magic wand and could solve one pressing global issue, what would it be, and why do you feel so passionately about it? Well, first answer would obviously be world peace, but that's a boring answer, so
save that for Miss World.
I'll save that for Miss World, indeed, because they're calling me any day now. Rather than I suppose it is a global issue, but what I would like to solve, and this is an argument we have in our house on a fairly regular basis, is our political structure. Now that sounds really deep and like I'm going to go off on some kind of political rant here, but this is the mediator in me coming out. We, particularly in this country, we have party politics where one party maintains that they are always right and the other maintains that the other is always wrong. And that's just not reality. One party can't always be right and the other always wrong. The answer is somewhere in the middle. And I would like to see a political system where people work collaboratively to solve the actual problems rather than bicker and whine about who did this, who did that, that drives me insane. So that's what I'd like to see, is actually politicians behaving like grown-ups and working collaboratively to solve the problem rather than bickering.
So we're doing away with adversarial politics, which we've had for many hundreds of years.
Yeah, that's
But
what I'm fixing.
It could be a global thing, couldn't it? We could have politicians across the globe working collaboratively, and wouldn't that be a world in a much happier and more peaceful place?
That's what I do with my magic wand.
So maybe that would solve your problem with world peace at the same time.
Maybe it would, indeed. There we go.
Meantime, back to the day job. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Cath. So thank you so much for your time today. And we'll carry on the conversation over tea and cake at some point, no doubt.
Excellent.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. We hope you found the discussions insightful and empowering. To stay connected and continue receiving valuable content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and be the first to know about our upcoming episodes. Don't forget to follow us on social media as well. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook and LinkedIn at Warner Goodman LLP, as well as YouTube at Piece of Pod. Thank you again. Until next time.